So I just did it totally out of convenience, but it changed my life. It became my calling. It didn't Life had to happen for me to know that this is what I was meant to do.
Interesting how that
So
works.
I'll have what she's having.
Welcome to another edition of
She talks confidence.
podcast.
Okay, everything looks good so far. Welcome back to the show. She Talks Confidence, and my special guest today is Lisa Greenberg. Hi, Lisa. How are you?
hey, very happy to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. And Lisa is a speaker, and she's an advocate and a highly regarded criminal defense lawyer. She's successfully defended and won some of the most high-profile cases in the Coastal Bend. Coastal Bend meaning what? Texas, and because you're in Texas.
Yeah, South Texas, along the coast in South Texas.
Okay. Lisa frequently speaks to audiences of hundreds of lawyers on how to effectively defend criminal charges such as domestic violence, sexual assault, and murder. Her passion is to help women how to use their unique power and emotion in the courtroom to tell the client's story. She's co-founder and chair of the Nueces County Mental Health Public Defender's Office. And we really need to talk about that part. I think that's a fascinating thing that you're doing with the Public Defender's Office. To tee it up, your dad was a lawyer. He literally brought you up in the courtroom. Is that right?
That's right. So my dad was a single dad. He had 4 girls. And I think it gave me a unique perspective because my dad was tough. My dad was Army, and then he was a prosecutor, a federal prosecutor. So we were raised, if we had some feelings, he would say, run a lap, do some push-ups. He did the best he could with these 4 very opinionated, outspoken girls. But since he was by himself, if we had a day off school, we would have to go to work with him. And he worked in the federal courthouse. And I think we terrorized that place. I remember messing with the poor bailiffs and running around and peeking in courtrooms and bothering judges, those kind of things. So I grew up in it without knowing that wasn't how other people were growing up.
It's such a unique perspective on things. So that got you interested in law. You went through the process, got out of law school, and went into, and you were doing some work in the prosecutor's office, I think. Then you decided to switch over and work more on the defendant's side. In that process, your realization, your epiphany when it came to your own confidence in working with this very diverse set of people.
Absolutely. First of all, I want to say, to be perfectly honest, I never wanted to be a lawyer because my family was lawyers. So the first thing I said was no law school, no law school. But I think
Interesting.
growing up in it, we had to advocate for everything we wanted. So I think it comes naturally to us. We just grew up that way. And I think it's in your blood. And so I went to college saying no law, but I found myself really attracted to political science. And then I changed my major to that. And I would get really into fairness and justice. And when I went to law school, I said, okay, I'll go to law school, but no criminal law and no family law. I remember saying that. And of course, I loved criminal law. I was invested in the cases we'd study. And I remember being like upset by some outcomes. And so I got out of law school and I had a bunch of loans. And so immediately where I'm from, El Paso, they offered me a job, probably because my dad was a prosecutor in El Paso and he was a federal prosecutor, but it was the DA's office. And they thought I would be a lot like my dad, I'm sure. And so I got put on the domestic violence unit, which at that time, this is 2004, I was waiting on my bar results and the legislation had changed to focus on domestic violence. So this was new. And it was very interesting. I'm proud of my work I did there, but I saw one side of a story. And of course, I was unmarried and I had no kids at this time. I was probably 26 years old. And I thought I knew everything. So I would come in and read the case and think, oh, this is so bad. I judged it on the paper I read, on the police report I read, and I would go forward from there. And then life happened. And I love to say that to people because then I got married and my husband was in the Army and he deployed to Iraq. And I was still in El Paso at the DA's office. And when he returned home, we went to Washington State, to Fort Lewis. He was transferred and I was pregnant. I had my first child. And then right away I had my second child. And we moved a couple places and then we ended up in Corpus Christi, Texas. I thought that I would go back to being a DA, but I had these 2 young kids, and so I decided to start taking court appointments to try to, number 1, pay for preschool, which was so expensive,
Hmm.
and not have to work to put them in daycare after school and pick them up. So I decided I'm gonna try this court-appointed work. I'm gonna try defense.
Is it because defense? Is it because that was easier to work around the schedule? Could you not work around the schedule from a prosecution? Is that more of a what 8 to 5 or something type of thing?
It is, that's the whole reason I started
Oh,
defense. I just thought
oh, okay.
I could pick my kids up at 2:30 or 3 or whenever, I can't remember when preschool ended,
Hmm.
but I didn't wanna work to put them in preschool and then aftercare. So I just did it totally out of convenience, but it changed my life. It became my calling. I didn't Life had to happen for me to know that this is what I was meant to do.
Interesting how that
So
works.
yeah, so I got my first court-appointed case, and I went in the jail for the first time. And I'd never A lot of lawyers get to say they've been arrested, and it gives them some street cred, and they get to identify, "I have been there." Unfortunately and unfortunately, I've never been arrested, I'm gonna knock on wood, and so it was a new experience for me to go in the jail and to meet a person who had been accused and was in jail and hear their story. And I can tell you that the first time I remember my first court appointed case, I met a woman and she told me her story. And she had grown up poor and had all these children and what had mental health problems and became addicted to drugs, self medicated. And and she looked at me like I was somebody who should fix her life.
Hmm.
And she handed her life to me, and whatever I said to do, she would do. And I remember looking at her and thinking, "Why are you trusting me? Do you know me? I'm a mess of a human myself. I don't know what I'm doing. I could barely get my kids to preschool and can't get them to stay in bed at night, all the things,
Right.
and trusted me." And I remember thinking, "What a responsibility." But it was the fact that she trusted me made me want to do a good job and made me want to speak out for her, and she was so grateful that I listened to her and her story, and I remember thinking, "I just need to tell her story. I need to tell them what she's been through. I need to tell these prosecutors who judge her who I had been, who this person is. Her name is not the defendant. She has a name. She's a human." And
Mhm.
so I started to get it there and realized what an awesome responsibility, and I better care about these people.
Mhm. Because you went in there and you had the ability to empathize with them, plus the fact that being a mom, because being a mom, it totally shifts your perspective as well. When you learn about somebody's story like you just spoke about,
Mhm.
it becomes about somebody else. Sometimes when you hit your roadblocks or when you have confidence issues, like we had spoken previously about this before, and then all of a sudden, when you're in a situation to where you need to show up for somebody else, that's a big thing, isn't it? And you had that experience.
Absolutely. I don't know if innately I have a mama bear quality that I didn't know about until I became a mama bear, but
Mhm.
there is something in me that wants to protect somebody who trusts me. When the whole world is against you, I've always felt it is my calling to stand up for somebody without a voice. I remember being as a child sticking up for people who were maybe the underdog. The David and Goliath story I always identified with. But it wasn't really developed until somebody trusted me, and it was my job to be their voice, and that was my sole purpose. And I think it took I had told you a little bit before, when I got out of law school, I remember there being so many mixed messages about women in law. I remember learning you had to wear like a gray or blue or black suit. And your skirt had to be, if you wear a skirt, past your knees. And you don't want to look too done up. And you want to be pleasing, but not too attractive.
Are these like unwritten rules, or and are there same rules for or like a checklist for guys? I would think no, but I'm just asking.
I don't think I've ever heard of there being one for guys, but our whole purpose, especially as trial lawyers, is what are these 12 people in the jury going to think of you?
Uh huh.
And at the time I graduated law school, which was 2004, there were a lot of lawyers that were female. But the message was, don't let it be about you. Don't distract with your face, your body, your clothes. And I remember that being really pressed upon us as we need to look very professional. I don't remember men necessarily getting that message, but we needed to look like we were going to be taken seriously. And I remember in the DA's office, people saying, put your hair in a ponytail. I remember being scared that if my nails were a color, that would be distracting. Don't wear earrings like these hoops, wear little
Mhm.
studs. I remember people telling me that. And so there was a message to me without me realizing it at that time to be average.
Hmm.
Just be mediocre. Don't be too much of one thing. Don't be too emotional. But don't be not emotional enough. Make sure you're logical. It
Wow,
was,
that's a walking on eggshell situation. Seems.
but I didn't know it until
Hmm.
I changed. And so when I started to represent other people, I was very emotional about it. I'm going to say that because if somebody handed their life to me, I cared about them, especially if I'm the only person who has heard their story and I'm all they have in the courtroom.
Mhm.
Many times when somebody is poor or indigent or doesn't have a family that can take off work and be in the courtroom with them or people in their corner, you are it.
Hmm.
And that responsibility makes me emotional. I can't hide that away, but I tried. In the
Hmm.
beginning of my legal career, I really tried. And for me, it made me when I finally let go, that's when I started to become effective and began winning my cases was when people could see that I was genuine and caring and how I felt.
That's
And
fascinating. That's using your superpower, which is your emotions, your connection to your emotions, your intuition, your level of empathy, all the things that initially they were they meaning whatever the whatever were trying to keep down or keep out of the logical, rational, linear approach to doing what you're doing. But then when you if I heard you correctly, in letting go of that, and I'd like to hear like how you let go of that specifically. But when you did, that became like the thing, right? That would became like the piece of the puzzle that created the level of success that you now have.
I think law school teaches you to lose your humanity. It's like
Mm,
we kept being taught this system called IRAC. What's the issue? I. What's the rule for the R? Apply it for the A, and conclusion C. Don't think, don't feel. Give me those four things.
mm,
But when you get out of law school, I think you become so when people would talk to me, you become a bad listener because you're like, what's the issue? Here's the rule. I find myself sometimes still doing that with my kids. Let's move it along. What's the issue? So I
mhm,
can help
right.
it.
Yeah.
And I tried to be that way for a long time. And so I was okay, mediocre, and I did okay.
Mm,
But when I let go of all of that and became the human in the courtroom, who I really was, and it wasn't that I told myself, "Be the human." It just happened because who I am, I find myself, and I don't know if you're like this or other people, but like I talk with my hands. I remember them
mhm.
telling me in high school, I mean, in law school, put your hands down. And I don't know how. I would sit on
Mhm.
my hand. And I remember a judge saying that I make faces. So I
Really?
told him, I would really try to, I smile a lot. Oh, or I have I show it in my
Mhm,
body.
mhm,
And finally, I told the jury, and I do it with every case now. I say, I've been told that I make faces when I feel something, that I emote a lot, or I use my hands. And the reason I say that now, it's a little trick I have, is that they'll watch me because I've owned it. And I say, please don't hold that against my client. I try not to do it. But they'll know if I think someone's lying because I'll make a face like, and they know
Wow.
they're looking for, or if I think something's really important, they're looking. So I owned
Right.
it. Um,
That's a brilliant move because
I think it's
you oh my
learning
god,
it.
you gave him a cheat sheet. You don't even so all of your nonverbal communication, you just told them exactly what you do. And then now you don't have to say anything, and you don't. There doesn't have to be any issues in the courtroom. All they have to do is look over,
I think
unless a judge sees you doing a massive eye
yeah,
roll or something, and they would have
I
an issue
try
with
to
that.
keep it polite, but this is always happening anyway,
Right.
so I use it now to my advantage. But what when I really cared about the person next to me and I was really upset about the situation they were in, the jury would care. because they would see that
Mhm.
I cared. And I feel one of the things I strongly believe is if you don't care, why should the jury? Why should anybody else care?
Yeah.
So I've learned to own it, own that.
And
And
how do you feel your inner confidence has been since that epiphany moment? And it seems like that really released you to being who you are, and it validates who you are, and you can just roll with that, and you're getting positive results from that.
it took me a bit. I remember getting some cases I didn't feel I had like imposter syndrome when I started. And I had a mentor. I remember I got my first murder case. And I had a young, very young African American male that had mental health issues. And I did not feel like I was good enough to represent him. I kept thinking, "What? I can't handle this. If I lose, he's going to go to prison for this long. And I cannot."
Mhm.
I kept saying, "I can't handle this. I need help." And I told my mentor, his name's Jimmy Granberry, and he said, "Hey, Lisa, get the F," he used that word, "get the F over yourself. It's not
Mhm.
about." And ever since that day, I had to say, "Get over yourself. It isn't about you." And that released me, I think, from a lot of it was my marching orders. And so that
That's a perfect affirmation, isn't it? It really is. That's a perfect sticky note on the mirror in the morning to set yourself up for anybody, right? To set yourself
Right.
up for just being in the right mindset going forward.
I to this day, I go and I tell this to juries too, before a case, no matter what it is. I've tried every kind of case now. I go in the bathroom at the courthouse in the public restroom and I just sit by the mirror and I say, "Please God, let me get over myself. Let me get over myself." And then I march back in, I roll my shoulders back and I walk back in.
Right. And you just move on, boogie forward. What a great, and usually at the end of the show, it's the call to action, right? It's the one little nugget of information or the kind of the cool little thing that you do or you can share with people. I think you just did just now. I think that's an amazing affirmation. It's get out of your own way. There's so many things to unravel here. And because I want to save a couple minutes at the end to talk about your mental health, the public defender mental health department, which I think is an amazing thing you're doing. The get over yourself, it's not about you is incredible, along with the one big epiphany that you had, which was leaning into your superpowers and not conforming to the stringent environment that was set up. And that could be a metaphor for so many women in so many careers or just life situations. It's incredible. The two things that popped out to me, what that were like changing, that shifted the thing, was the listening part, when you shifted from going through having those mental things and not being a good listener because you're always trying to think about the next thing to say type of thing, which happens in a very linear environment, a very rational environment. It's the active listening, it's being a good listener. And then also tapping into your emotions because they are an asset. There's a thing called emotional IQ, which means that you use your emotions instead of them using you, because they can be insanely powerful. And that's the one thing that a lot of my clients come in, that my women clients come in and they talk about all sorts of things and relationships and this and that. And sadly, a lot of the times they have a very wrong impression of their emotions and they talk about them being too emotional and this and that. I said, I don't think that's too emotional at all. You have a gauge on what's going on and you're just validating what the situation is to you. In taking that and moving forward, you have been a part of a lot of different boards, a lot of different associations, and then you decided to, because of this experience, decided to create this mental health public defender's office, which was something that's new, right?
We did not have a public defender's office in my county. And there's a lot of criticism of public defender's office in different counties. But what we did have was lawyers who would take court appointed cases, and some were educated on mental health and some were not. And we had many cases that were mental health cases where people would self medicate or they were in a state of crisis. And instead of going to a mental health facility, they were arrested. They were warehoused in a jail. And a lot of times with mental illness, we expect the jail to take care of people
Mhm.
where they're not equipped to. The sheriff's officers they don't have mental health backgrounds. They don't know why somebody's acting out. They don't know they're in crisis. We have this whole problem where we're warehousing people that are in need of help. Instead of getting treatment, they're getting punished. And then
Mhm.
they're not able to make decisions for themselves. And I always say, a lot of times we just convict them, put it on their tab. You're not solving the problem of mental health or mental illness there. And so it
Mhm.
was frustrating. It was frustrating to watch. I'd always wondered why we didn't have a mental health public defender's office. And I had pushed for it and was told that's not going to happen here. That's not going to happen. A few years later, I had a big mental health case here. I'm just going to give you a very brief scenario, but I had a client who was schizophrenic, had gone to his mother, who was a social worker, had called the police, asked for help, asked for commitments, asked for everything she possibly could, was not given it. And he eventually decompensated and he actually killed his father and burned his house down. So it was a
Mhm.
horribly sad case, huge case. I was actually able to get him a not guilty reason of insanity by tracing back his mental health history.
Mhm.
The reason I tell you that, it was big in the news and everybody kept saying, "What is the problem here with mental health?" And his mother kept advocating and saying, "There's this problem. I did everything I was supposed to. I called for help, but because he was 18, I couldn't make him go get help." All these problems. So together, we got with a judge during COVID. There was some funds available, and we were able to start the mental health public defender's office for Nueces County. There was some pushback, but the timing was right too, with COVID and a focus on mental health and these funds available. And the Texas Indigent Defense Commission helped sponsor it. So there were all the stars aligned. We were able to start it. And what this is supposed to be is educated lawyers on mental health that can really look at the cases and not just get somebody a conviction and out of jail without any help. They're really looking at
Mhm.
treatment options. They have social workers in the office. They're trained to deal with these cases where other people aren't. We have chosen a public defender who is brilliant, and I couldn't say enough good things about her. And so I'm oversight of that and helping form it and watching it grow. It just started taking its first cases in Oasis County. So I'm very excited about it. I always say to people, if this is my baby, I've been
Hmm.
pushing for this, so I can't wait to watch it succeed and help people.
That's
It's really neat.
fantastic. Do you think that something like this, as it goes on and becomes more effective and expands a little bit, do you think it can be used as a pilot program to be used in different public defenders' offices around the country?
I so hope so, because I think that not only can they teach other lawyers, let's say just a regular lawyer that doesn't have a mental health background, they can help teach the police. They're going to work hand in hand with the police on, this is a mental health crisis. There are these places available. Do not just throw this person in jail.
Mhm.
They can also be a resource for families that don't have other options. They have a place to turn to. We have a mental health crisis in this country. And I know that's no surprise to people, but it often leads to things like self medication, drug abuse cases, or acting out assault cases. You can't just put a band aid on it. You have to treat the problem. And so I'm hoping that this holistic view can catch on and we look at the problem and try to treat it instead of just throw people away that have mental health issues.
What a fantastic approach to things. And I hope good luck to the whole thing. And hopefully that expands and gets going. It sounds like an amazing thing. Being on the mental health side of things, it's it is a incredibly huge crisis. And I'm, to be honest, shocked that that's this layer in the criminal justice system hasn't been there or is not there now. It's mind boggling to me because that's really the essence. You have to go in and do some discovery in regards to the mental health aspects of things in order to get things, because you can take somebody, obviously take somebody that has a big mental health issue, and prison or jail time isn't going to do anything except perhaps exacerbate the situation. So it's such a great angle to hit, and I hope all the best on that. Thank you,
Thank
Lisa.
you.
I really appreciate you sharing those things that you shared. And remember, get over yourself. It's
Right.
right. It's not about you. I love
It's
that.
not
That is such a great like morning affirmation. It's fantastic. If you have any comments or questions for Lisa, I'm going to post her contact information and along with her bio in the show notes. Any other questions for me, you know how to get a hold of me. It's tony@javabud.com, or just comment on this on the YouTube or any of the platforms that this is on. I hope things are good, and I will talk to you next week. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Bye.